Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I think I can get in this chair. My back is a little tender today, so I apologize. Welcome, everyone, to a wonderful conversation with one of my most favorite people in the entire world. They don't make them any better. And John is only wonderful because of Margaret. Let's hear it from Margaret. I mean, seriously. John and Margaret Dalton, who have been such stalwarts and incredible members of this community. It's great to have this conversation with John, who's had a fascinating life and has written an absolutely fascinating book. And so, John, thank you for allowing us to have this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Randy, and I really appreciate it, and you did a great job with your sermon today.
The check is in the mail. Thank you. So let's start with some of the obvious ones. Why did you write this book, John?
Well, I was telling a friend a story, and he said, "You really need to write a book." And I dismissed it for the next 4 or 5 people that said that, but when the number kept growing, I thought, well, maybe I should write a book. And then at my retirement party, I said I was thinking about writing a book, and I got a thunderous applause, and people yelled, "Yes, please do it, do it." And so we started it before COVID, and you know, being at home and in my home office, I had time to write it, and it was a blessing and a curse.
I was about to say, I'm not sure I have a book in me. I've written some articles that have been published, but not a book. How was that process for you? It's a tough process.
It is a tough process, and I won't say I enjoyed it, but it was a process that Margaret says if I do another book, it's going to be with another wife.
That's so great. Well, let me just say, I know it must have been a challenge at times, but the end result is wonderful. So
well,
thank you for doing it. So now tell us about, I understand that you said to me that you're donating all the proceeds of your book.
Well, I love the cathedral, and part of the proceeds are going to go to that I would earn or go to the cathedral, and the other 2/3 are going to the Naval Academy Foundation and Community Renewal International, and you've been to that and been exposed to that, and I have a good friend that started it in Shreveport, and we're trying to bring it to Washington.
It's a great cause, 3 great causes, and thank you, John, for doing that on behalf of the cathedral. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So tell us about the cover, too. I know the cover is where are you?
Well,
that does not look like an aircraft carrier.
I'm on the USS Constitution and Old Ironsides, and I was there. The ship was sailing under its own power for the first time in 116 years, and we had the entire delegation from Massachusetts, and Senator Ted Kennedy and Senator John Kerry and Walter Cronkite, who loves to sail, was in it, was aboard it, and also the Blue Angels flew over that day, and it was a great celebration.
Well, I'm glad you didn't wreck it or anything. So the sails were fully aloft when you were out? The sails were all
they were.
Wow, that must have been incredible.
It was sailing under its own sail power.
So let's just start at the beginning of the book. In the preface of your book, you share a quote that you learned from Phil Lader. Tell us a little bit about not only the quote, read the quote, and then tell us about it and who Phil is or was.
Okay. I'll put on my glasses so I can see better. As I began to write this book and reflect upon my life, one particularly poignant line stuck out to me. Phil Lader, the former ambassador to the court of St. James or the United Kingdom, and also served with me in the Clinton administration as a good friend, once said something in a speech that really resonated with me. He said, quote, "Everyone in this room is very busy and has a lot of balls in the air, but 3 of those balls are crystal, and if you break one of those, you have a big problem. They are your family, your friends, and your faith. Be sure and nourish them. If so, they will be there for you when you need them," end quote. I believe that is absolutely right. And one will see in this book they have been there for me when I needed them most.
Amen. And you and Margaret have been married, what, 52 years?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a good creed to lead by, a good creed to live by. So thank you for sharing that. So let's jump into you're such a man of faith and have been for most of your life. I know that the book tells us that your dad was a Methodist and your mom was a Baptist, and you were raised in the Methodist church. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about your growing up in the church and especially your encounter with Billy Graham.
Well, we didn't have a car we didn't have a car for the first 7 years of my life, and so we used to walk 10 or 11 blocks to church, but we did that every Sunday, and we had blessings at night, blessings at meals, and prayers at night, and my faith has always been important to me, starting with Billy Graham crusade. When he came to Shreveport in 1951, I was about 9.5 years old, and he, in his closing prayer, said, "If you want Jesus to be the Lord of your life, raise your hand." And we were in prayer, and he said, after he closed the prayer, he said, "All those who raise their hands come down to the field," and we were in State Fair Stadium, which is now the Independence Bowl, and so I went down there, and they gave me a paperback book of John, and they asked me to read that, and so my mother and I read it every night, a chapter, and on the third night I got to the 16th verse of John, and on John 3:16, and she said, "That is the basis of our faith, and you should memorize that. Read it again." And I read it again, and she said, "That's the basis of our belief." And for those of you who don't know, John 3:16 is
For God
so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And I've tried to do that.
Amen. It's amazing how powerful those, how experiences we have as children are sometimes the absolutely most powerful that stick with us for the rest of our lives. I've mentioned it before, but I can remember like it was yesterday, my father kneeling beside my bed, teaching me the Lord's Prayer. And I was probably 4 or 5 years old, but that, just stuck with me like nothing. Do you remember what Billy Graham preached that day, or was it one of those massive crowds that he used to draw?
Well, he had over 200,000 people in the course of the crusade, but I mean there was a respectable crowd in State Fair Stadium. There must have been 30,000 people there, and it was really moving. I mean, he had a great crusade.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And he preached here at the cathedral as well some time ago, not too long ago. God bless him. Rest in peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you grew up in Shreveport and were quite an athlete. And at some point, because of an experience, was it of your uncle who had served in the Navy?
Yeah, he won the Navy Cross, which is the highest award that one can win, can be awarded in the Navy, and that he was a hero of World War II.
And at some point, he was inspiring to you, and you decided you wanted to go to the Naval Academy.
Well, I saw how my parents sacrificed to put my older brother and older sister. I have an older sister that's 10 years older, and my brother is 6 years older. I think my parents thought they were through having kids, and then I showed up. But, I wanted to, I heard somebody, an inspirational speaker who was coming to our school to speak. He said that he wanted his son to go to the U.S. Naval Academy because he was convinced that's what the best overall education a young man could get. So I said, that's for me, and I want to do that, and I mentioned it to my brother, and he wrote the congressman a letter the next day and said, please send John Dalton the application process. And so I started working on that then.
And at some point, you had some aspirations to play football.
Well, I was a pretty good athlete, and I had a friend of my brother's who won a scholarship to Tulane University, and he played the same position, quarterback, and I wanted to do that, and I was dedicated to winning the scholarship, and then I had a knee injury that they told me that I could not play contact sports again, and the doctor said, if you take care of your knee, you'll be able to play 9 holes of golf and dance with your wife, but you can forget about athletics. And so when this inspirational speaker spoke about the Naval Academy, I thought, that's what I'll do.
Tell us about that process to get into the Naval Academy. It's a tough process.
It is, and I don't do well on standardized tests, and I didn't do well in my senior year in high school, but I didn't get in the first try, and so I went to LSU, and all you needed to get into the LSU was a high school diploma, and I had one of those. And I did well at LSU and was inducted into an honorary fraternity that Phi Eta Sigma that is for strong academics, and I did well and was president of my pledge class and elected to the student government. And so I said, if my next door neighbor was worked at a drugstore, and she said our Congressman Overton Brooks had breakfast there every morning that they were in recess. And so I went up, and she said I would tell you when he's going to be there. And so I went up there and I said, Congressman, if you give me the ability to go to the Naval Academy, you won't regret it. And he did, and I got in.
That's great. So he was eating eggs and bacon, and you were just like, I love it. That's great. And when you were, in my family, Melissa's from Louisiana, and in my family, they have pictures of Billy Cannon up there next to the crucifix. He's about as famous as you get. And a lot of people don't know who Billy Cannon is, but he was there when you were at LSU, right?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to see 3 Heisman Award winners in 5 years of college. Billy Cannon, LSU had never had one before, and the year I was there, he won it. And then I went to the Naval Academy, and my first year, plebe year, Joe Bellino won it, and my last year, Roger Staubach won it. And so I defy anybody else to say they had 5 years of college and watched 3 Heisman Trophy winners.
That's fantastic. So tell us some of the things that you love the most about the Academy, or that you found very special for you at the Academy?
Well, the discipline, we had a superintendent who was there, and he said over and over again, you can do anything you set your mind to do, and don't you forget it. And that made an impression on me, and I remembered what he said, and I believed it.
And I understand, I can only imagine, did you have to take a lot of engineering classes, that kind of thing?
I did.
God bless you. You also were what they called the Deputy Brigade Commander at the Naval Academy. For us uninitiated, what does that mean?
Well, this is the number 2 position. The Brigade Commander is a 6 striper, and I was the Deputy Brigade Commander, and it's selected based on academics and the aptitude for the service, and we were ranked. We led the brigade of midshipmen, and it was a real honor, and I was grateful to be in that. In those shoes. So
would that mean like during the Army-Navy game you'd be leading in the cadets?
Yes.
Or was that right? Cadet?
Yeah.
Midshipmen, forgive me.
Midshipmen.
So when you got out of the Naval Academy, you went into the Navy, of course, and served on submarines. And because of you, I got to actually go into a submarine. But a lot of people have never been in one. Tell us what it's like to be. You were in the last diesel submarine and first nuclear or early nuclear submarines?
I was on the last diesel electric boat the Navy built on the USS Blueback in Pearl Harbor. And it was my battalion officer recommended that I go into submarines. and he was a submariner, and he said, you need to do that. And I took his advice, and it was really nice. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but it was close quarters, as you know. You know, we had a stateroom, which is a joke, but the stateroom was a bunk, 3 bunk beds and two seat, you know, desk and close quarters, in a very, very much close quarters, and I was concerned about serving, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, some of those, were they still hot bunking in those days, like you see in the movies?
Well, the officers didn't, but some of the enlisted men did.
Hot bunking meant that when you were working your shift, you were working your shift and someone else was sleeping in your bunk. And then when your shift was over, they'd get out and work their shift and you'd sleep in their bunk.
Yeah.
Which is way too much like summer camp. Thank you very much. Yes, and I was so amazed that when you took me on the tour of it was an attack boat, is that what it was? Attack submarine? That there's some bunks that are literally right under the torpedoes.
Yeah, they are.
That'll humble you.
Yeah.
So, John, through your book, you talk about some of the challenging moments that you've had in your life, that you've had great success, but you've also had some moments that were difficult, that were hard, like we all do in our lives. And you talk about how your faith was there for you through those moments. And one of them, being the death of your niece, the untimely death of your niece when you were on active duty. And then later on in your career when you were part of a savings and loan that went under. Talk a little bit about, whatever you feel comfortable with about some of those harder moments and how God was with you during that time.
Well, the first incident, I was in Rota, Spain on a submarine, and we had 30 days to get the ship ready to go on patrol, and we spent 70 days on patrol, 10 weeks, and submerged. And my sister lost her daughter, and she was my niece, and I really wanted to be home with her, and we were deploying in 4 days, and the commanding officer said, "John, I'm really sorry about your loss, but you can't leave. I can't replace you in 4 days." And I understood that completely, but I realized that was not the kind of life that I wanted. And so I thought about it a lot on patrol, and when we got back, I resigned from the Navy and went to Wharton to get an MBA. And then it was a tough time, and my family, my friends, and my faith stood with me during those times.
I was about to say the fact that you decided because of that experience of your niece tragically dying, that the Navy was not necessarily what you wanted to make a long career out of it. It seems like that was a moment when you were making sure to take care of one of those crystals that you were mentioning in that quote at the beginning. And I understand, did your niece, she died at summer camp?
She died at summer camp, and she was in a crafts class, and she said the mallet seemed heavy to her, and And the counselor said, well, go to your cabin and rest. And they found her dead in her bunk. And it was a tragedy in our family, and I wanted to go home to be with my sister.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be underwater for 10 weeks and sort of carrying that with you.
Well, you know, my friends, my faith, and my family got me through it. I mean, it was tough to do, but I think those crystal balls are crystal.
They're precious, absolutely precious.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, John, you have so many incredible successes in this book, and it's wonderful, and we're going to talk some more about those. But I know that in the 80s, you had an experience with a savings and loan that was really difficult.
When I left the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, an executive search firm reached out to me and said, you know, you have an aptitude for being the treasurer of the real estate division of this savings and loan. And so I went with them, and I took that job, and it did well for a couple of years, and there's some developers came to me and said, you're working for a private company, and the CEO is younger than you are. You know, you can't advance in this company. We're going to buy a savings and loan, and we want you to be the chairman and CEO of it, and you'll have an equity position. And I did have to invest $1 million in the deal, and I was not worth that. And so everything went great for a couple of years, and then we started losing money. The oil prices, I remember in 1986 reading a fortune prediction in a Fortune magazine that said oil prices were going to go from $40 a barrel to $60, $70 a barrel in 1 year. Instead, they went from $40 to $10 a barrel, and the Congress passed a law that said real estate was worth less than it had been. And with those two situations, you couldn't make money in a savings and loan. And all the savings and loans in the state of Texas were having a tough time, and most of them failed. And so Margaret was worried about me, and she said, why don't you go see this counselor that you think highly of? And I told him the story of the savings and loan, and he said, what's the worst thing that could happen? I said, Don, I could have to declare bankruptcy. And he said, the streets are lined with people in Texas that have had to declare bankruptcy. And he mentioned 3 people. He said, Governor John Connally, who has been Secretary of the Navy and Governor of Texas and Secretary of the Treasury, had to declare bankruptcy. John Murkison, who owned the Dallas Cowboys, had to declare bankruptcy. And Dr. Michael DeBecke, who did the first heart transplant in the United States, had to declare bankruptcy, and that made me feel better, but but I was still a hurting puppy. I mean, you know, I was broke. I didn't have any money, and I owed the bank a healthy chunk of change, and I had 2 kids to educate, and so I got a life insurance license to sell life insurance, and I was doing that meagerly, but my brother-in-law, Margaret's brother, called me and said he was working for a private equity firm, which was kind of like Goldman Sachs, and they had a vacancy, and he would talk to his senior partner and recommend me for the job, and I ended up getting the job, and later I opened an office for Stevens in San Antonio, and got back on my feet.
And in fact, never did have to declare bankruptcy.
No, I didn't.
Right.
I didn't.
Well, you know, you mentioned the Dallas Cowboys owner who declared bankruptcy. As a Commanders fan, I would love to see the Cowboys go bankrupt. So tell us just a little bit about John. I want to jump to being Secretary of the Navy, but you were also part of Carter's administration. Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, which
Ginnie
one?
Mae.
Ginnie
Mae. That was my first job in government, and I was, you know, pretty good at it. And when I had a great piece of advice from somebody who was a client of ours at Goldman Sachs, and he recommended that I try to help the president he said, you can do a good job as president of Ginnie Mae, but help the president find something that's hard to do and help him get it done. And so I did that, and when the Panama Canal treaties came about, there was 2 senators that I helped get the vote for in favor of the Panama Canal treaties, Russell Long and Lloyd Benson, and it passed by 1 vote, so I was sitting pretty at the White House. But he was a fine man and the longest living president we've ever had. He's 97 years old, and Margaret and I went down for his 75th wedding anniversary.
God bless him. God bless him. And then less than 5 years after the savings and loan incident, you were Secretary of the Navy under President Clinton. Tell us, how did that happen?
That's a miracle. I mean, that is a miracle. But I was supportive. I met Governor Clinton in 1979, and he was very active in the Democratic Leadership Council, and I was supportive of the Democratic Leadership Council, and I got to know him well during that time, and I supported him when he announced to run for president, and I hosted a fundraiser in the primary season and also in the general election, and he nominated me to be Secretary of the Navy, and I will never forget that. And that's the best job in government, in my opinion. You know, Bill Clinton told me that he had more people asked to be cabinet secretaries. He had more people asked to be Secretary of the Navy than any of the cabinet secretaries that he had appointments for. And it's a great job, and I really enjoyed my time as secretary.
I know how much those men and women, the sailors, meant to you and during that time of service, and not to mention all the good Army-Navy games.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some of...
Well, the issues were, when I became Secretary of the Navy, they had the tail-hook scandal where women were treated shabbily, and the big cheating scandal at the Naval Academy. Gays in the military, the Congress had changed the law with respect to gays in the military and women in combat. And there was, as the result of the end of the Cold War, there was a drawdown in the military, and there was a big headline in Navy Times which said, "Navy morale at all-time low." And welcome aboard, Secretary Dalton. That was within a few weeks of my taking office, and I love the job, but those were tough issues.
Yes, they had a lot on your plate during those years. How long did you serve as the 70th Secretary of the Navy?
5.5 years, and the average term of a secretary is less than 3 years, and so it was a pretty good gig.
What was it like when you no longer had a plane to fly you around?
It was not as much fun as flying commercial.
Tell us about Margaret. You and Margaret have such an incredible marriage that is a model for so many of us who know you. She was quite active when you were Secretary of the Navy.
She was, and they asked her when she was the First Lady of the Navy Department, they said, what kind of what kind of First Lady do you want to be? Do you want to be active or work on issues, or do you want to just go to cocktail parties and enjoy life? And she said she wanted to work on things that she could help with. And I'll never forget going to Pearl Harbor for the first time, and I was going off to see sailors and Marines, and Margaret was being escorted by Navy wives and seeing real estate or housing of the Navy. And they first showed her Air Force housing, which was pretty good. And she said, well, I'd like to see Navy housing. And she says, was that the slum that we saw? And she said, no, that's Navy housing. And so Margaret realized that she actually teared up. We were, after we finished the day, we were going to a dinner and we were changing clothes, and she said, she broke down in tears telling me about the Navy housing. And I said, Margaret, I will have a briefing when I get back, and I want you to come to it. And she did, and she worked on that Navy housing really hard, and she did a great job. To give you an example, we had this briefing, and I took the materials down to see Secretary Bill Perry, who was the Secretary of Defense, and there was just me and him in his office, no staff or anything. And I said, Mr. Secretary, we can't allow the sailors or Marines. Air Force was here, Army was here, Navy was here, Marine Corps was lower than that. And I said, we can't allow our sailors and Marines to live in this kind of housing. And I left some stuff for him to review, and he called me, or the deputy secretary called me and said, the secretary has given you $100 million to spend over the next 2 years for housing. My only question is, do you want it to all go for housing? And I said, every penny. And so we got $100 million for housing due to Margaret.
That's quite a renovation. That's wonderful.
That is.
And did $100 million, does it go a long way? There's a lot of housing.
Well, it was over 2 years, and it didn't solve the problem, but it made
certainly improved things.
Yes, certainly improved things.
Well, why don't we then, John, thank you so much for sharing and allowing me to pepper you with questions. Now I'm going to allow these people to pepper you with questions. If anyone has a question they'd like to ask, just raise your hand and Margaret will pass you the microphone. We have a few minutes left. People always start off shy. There's one over here.
Yes, sir. Alex.
Just a technical question. You were on submarines. Is it a submariner or a submariner?
Submariner. A submariner is lower than it's not a good mariner. And submariner is the proper term.
That's good to know.
John, one of the things that the Navy gets a lot of positive publicity is the Top Gun movies, the old one from 20 years ago, and then the one that's now nominated for Best Picture for Academy Award, and they say that Tom Cruise's second go at it is even better than the first, and they compare it to Cary Grant and all that. Does the Navy itself like those movies and think they were well done and so forth? What's the thought of the Navy?
They are a godsend. I mean, they really help Navy recruiting, and I've seen both of them, and they're very, very good, and they enhance our recruiting.
I have a question.
You're in trouble now, John.
I think most of these people have not been on a submarine. Tell a little bit more about the water situation on both the Blueback and the John C. Calhoun, and also about being able to receive messages. I can't remember whether you've said that or not, but the water situation is a biggie.
Yeah. Well, on the USS Blueback, which was the last diesel-electric boat the Navy built, there was a dearth of fresh water, and so we couldn't take showers often. Sometimes we'd go a week or 10 days without taking a shower, and when the showers were open, everybody took advantage of that. But on the nuclear power submarine, we could turn salt water into, because of nuclear power, it could turn salt water into fresh water, and we had water purifiers that did that, and that was great, and that was a big plus on the nuclear submarines. But they were both tight. I mean, from the standpoint of room in the submarine, there wasn't much extra space, and you know, you got used to it because there were 130 other people staying on the submarine, and you know, what are you complaining about?
If you're a submariner, is your pay, is it like hazardous duty pay to be on a small boat with a bunch of smelly people?
You do get hazardous duty pay, and that's an advantage.
Yeah, with a lot of stinky people, I think you ought to. I think Ann Carroll and Jan had questions, yeah.
John, you were talking a bit about how traumatic it was to not be able to be with your sister. And you mention a lot of times in the book, you mentioned faith and its role in all the things that you encountered in your life. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think my sister benefited from her faith. She was married to an Episcopal priest, and she was devout in her beliefs. And you know, faith has always been important to me, and I've benefited from it in that you know, we're all struggling Christians, or Christians under construction. But I believe in God, and Jesus Christ is my Savior.
You also, John, had, not only did you have Billy Graham, but one of my very favorite preachers of all time, some people may know of, I hope if you don't, you should read him, John Claypool, who was a Baptist minister who became an Episcopalian. He was a friend of yours, wasn't he?
He was. Matter of fact, I am a member of this cathedral because of John Claypool. He was a very good friend of John Claypool, and he knew that I knew him, and he called.
Yeah, you mean Sam Lloyd was a good friend. Yeah.
Sam Lloyd was a good friend of
John's. Yeah.
John Claypool was a good friend of Sam Lloyd, and so John Claypool called me, and he was going to come to the induction service for Sam Lloyd, and invited me and Margaret and I to join him, and Sam Lloyd was a great preacher, and he was really great, and so we decided to become to join the cathedral.
Well, thank you, John Claypool. God bless you. And John wrote an incredible book about the death of his daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Which is one of the most, I can't remember the name of it.
Shoes of a Fellow Struggler.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Incredible little book.
John, you and Margaret have been on the ground floor of a really transformative nonprofit called Community Renewal, which is the third of the beneficiaries of your what I hope will be millions in royalties from the sales of this book. And I know enough about it from you two to know what an extraordinary program that's been in Shreveport. And I was hoping that you might be able, you and Margaret, to tell us a little bit about that work and why it's so important to you.
Well, it's all about community building, and it's Mac McCarter, who's the founder of Community Renewal. He was a he was a graduate of TCU and was a minister before he became founder of Community Renewal, and he went to the toughest neighborhoods and where the crime was way high and poverty was the prominent feature of, and they were mostly African Americans, and he was there every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. and knocked on doors and became friends with them, and he's a wonderful man and started this wonderful foundation. They have a method that they go through, and it really works, and has been, and crime rates have dropped in Shreveport, and there is more degrees as a result of schooling that they helped people get their GEDs that had dropped out of school, and he really is a great guy and a great man, and we support Community Renewal.
Yeah, his goal, the thing that was amazing in Shreveport, wasn't it, John, that he was able to get people from all different neighborhoods, all different parts of the city, to come together in friendship with one another.
Absolutely.
It was like neighbor to neighbor. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we can send emails all around the world, but we don't know who's living and dying 3 or 4 doors down from us. And he helped fix that. He really did.
And he's doing some of that, trying to do some of that work here in Washington, isn't he? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We hope to get it started in Washington.
Absolutely. Run there, Margaret.
Yes, Mr. Secretary. This past week, I happened to have coffee with a neighbor, friend, retired 3-star admiral and a former congressman. And he remarked that you were his favorite Secretary of the Navy and had great respect for you and how you would analyze things you always ask for the other opinion and what the downsides were. And that's rare among a secretary.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that very nice compliment.
Amen. And I think that's the perfect place to wrap this up and to say thank you, John. John's going to be signing his book over in the South Transept right after this, so if you'll let him get over there, then we can all go over and speak to him there. But John, thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you for having me,
today.
Randy. I appreciate it.
Thank
Bless
you.
you. Bless you. Thank you, sir.